My dear friends, good day. Do you like serial killers? Okay. Well, I'll warn you, this episode is going to be quite sordid, a little bit dirty. So today I take you to the London of the late 19th century, when England is the most prominent world power, with Queen Victoria in power. An era that is logically called the Victorian era. London was then the most populous metropolis in the world, the capital of the world's first industrial power, and the world's largest colonial empire. A modern, very rich, and powerful city in the world. Most of the monuments we know well from London date from this period. Big Ben, for example. But this prosperity has its dark side. A mass of poor people and recent immigrants, Irish and Jewish in particular, who crowd into miserable, unhealthy, and dangerous neighborhoods. In London, in the East End, it's said that the wind blows the smoke from the factories there, while the western part, the West End, that is the rich part, has healthier air. Yes, because factories are not missing in London, as in the rest of England. The country which is at the origin of the Industrial Revolution. At the time, there were no real anti-pollution standards. The coal-fired machines blithely released all their fumes, and the coal particles, which were heavier than air, fell on the ground and the facades of houses, blackening everything, including the lungs of Londoners. With the humidity of the Thames, the river that crosses London, and this pollution, the working-class neighborhoods are plunged into a smog, a thick, almost permanent haze that makes it impossible to see more than 10 meters away. Yes, the famous smog that we now find in some very large polluted cities. In short, you can see the scenery. In these miserable neighborhoods protected by this haze of pollution, the man who created the concept of the serial killer, Jack the Ripper, was going to be rampant. It all begins on August 31st, 1888, when a London prostitute named Mary Ann Nichols, whose misery has pushed her to sell her body, is found murdered in the Whitechapel district. So far, nothing very surprising. Indeed, prostitutes are legion in the area, 1,200 according to account of the time. They're single women, single mothers, workers who can no longer work, etc. To sum up, they were ideal targets with daily insecurities and to whom misfortune often befell. As for Whitechapel, this neighborhood where misery and alcoholism reign, it's better not to hang out there too late at night. And actually, even during the day. It's a real labyrinth of pubs, which is pretty cool, but also filled with dangerous drunks, which is not so nice. Additionally, you can also find houses where you can rent a bed for the night, if you are not too careful about hygiene, in a district without sewers or gutters. In itself, this murder in a neighborhood where one easily disappears in the case of bad encounters is not very original. What is original, however, is that the unfortunate woman's throat was slit, and her belly was cut open with a long knife. There are all kinds of crazies in the neighborhood, but belly cutters are strangely few. So I'll warn you right away, the next part of the video may be a bit hard in the details. At the morgue, we discover that the unfortunate woman's genitals were also lacerated with several violent blows. A week later, another woman, Annie Chapman, is found dead near the scene of the first crime. She too was killed with a long knife and cut open in the same way. That is, disemboweled. As for the first one, I forgot to mention this little detail. Some of her organs are missing. The vagina, the uterus, and the bladder were removed. The police at first aren't too concerned about the deaths of prostitutes in Whitechapel, but are beginning to think that there may be a serial killer in action. Of course, serial killers already existed in the past. In France, we think directly of the famous Jules de Retz, Joan of Arc's companion. But here, the great novelty brought by this story is the use of the press. At the end of the 19th century, the press was increasingly read. Newspapers were very cheap. The level of education has been steadily increasing, and technical advances now allow for very large print runs. The press is always looking for juicy or scary stories to sell their papers. And with Jack the Ripper, we understand that they have hit the jackpot of stars. For example, an evening paper that has just been founded sees its sales multiply by 10. The Illustrated Police News, the first of the magazines exclusively devoted to criminal cases, offers a weekly summary of the investigation in images. Even the newspaper of reference, The Times, is interested. Without the press and the role it will play in this case, it is likely that we would not know this story, which would have been forgotten by all. The murderer is well aware of the importance of the media. He sends a letter on September 27th to a London newspaper. It is in red type because it is written in blood. The guy has a theatrical flair, you can't deny it, but it is still very creepy. In the letter, he makes fun of the police who can't arrest him. He says that he likes his job and that he will do it again soon. He promises that next time he will cut off the victim's ears and send them to the police. Above all, the letter is signed by Jack the Ripper. The police encourage the publication of the letter in the hope that someone will recognize the handwriting. The press then reported on the various murders and began to speculate. It is claimed that the use of a long knife is typical of a butcher, or even a doctor for the precision of the cuts of the organs. In any case, the description of crimes sells papers, and newspapers do not hesitate to describe everything in detail. Very quickly, Jack the Ripper became famous. The negative influence of certain media is not new. 3 days later, on September 30th, 2 other women, maybe prostitutes but we don't really know, are found dead. Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes. They were killed about 15 minutes apart. Catherine Eddowes, whose face was horribly scarred, had one of her ears, her nose, and one of her kidneys cut off. On October 1st, a new letter reaches the same London newspaper as the previous, a shorter one, but still signed by Jack the Ripper. It rejoices over the night's double murder, and the murderer regrets not having had time to cut off, as promised, the 2 ears for the police. Handwriting experts are called in, and they think it's the same author. On October 16th, a third letter arrives. It is more contested than the previous ones because the handwriting is different. It reaches the police and not the usual newspaper, and it is addressed, I quote, "From Hell." Hence the title of the movie From Hell with Johnny Depp, which revisits the Jack the Ripper story. This letter contains a piece of human kidney that is impossible with the forensic means of the time to attribute to one of the victims. For the experts and DNA analysis, we will have to wait another century. For the time being, not really lucky. We don't know either if the letter is really from Jack, since the graphologists can't agree on the subject. As for the other piece of kidney, he writes, the author, "I fried it, I ate it, and it was very good." On November 5th, 1888, a 5th murder was added to the previous ones. Still a woman, Mary Kelly, but with 2 novelties. She is only 25 years old, while the other victims were in their 40s. And above all, she is found dead in her home and not in the street, as in the previous crimes. Obviously, since they were not at the mercy of the first policeman, Jack the Ripper took his time. And here, too, there are pictures, but clearly I would not show them. So I'll just describe the scene, and honestly, I don't know what's better for you because of our brain power when it comes to imagining things that aren't really happy. The victim's clothes were folded neatly on a chair, as were her books lined up by the fire. Like the others, she was disemboweled, and her organs placed around the room. The intestines were thrown around the bed. The arms were separated from the body. One breast has been placed under the victim's head, while the second is placed under her left foot. Her face was slashed. When the press reported this sordid murder, Jack the Ripper was already known all over the world. 160 newspapers from Mexico to Australia described the crimes. Even Queen Victoria showed great interest in the subject and urged the police to arrest the criminal as soon as possible. It's a bit of a gory version of life. What's certain in any case is that the police are not doing their homework. We don't really know the exact number of victims to attribute to Jack the Ripper. Officially, there are 5. The 5 canonical ones, as they're called. But according to the newspapers and some police officers, there are more. Perhaps 11 or 13. The investigation is complicated in a neighborhood where violence is daily. After being entrusted to the Westchapel Municipal Police, it's quickly transferred to Scotland Yard. The investigators managed to interview 2,000 people, including witnesses who claim to have seen the victims with a mysterious man before their death. The problem is the description of this man that the witnesses give. Some saw him as very tall, or rather short, with a mustache, without or wearing a Sherlock Holmes hat, and well-dressed, or in rags like a drug addict. In short, we're well underway and the investigators are following the leads of the visiting doctors Boucher and Marin without success. 80,000 flyers are distributed to obtain information on this case, and even sniffer dogs are used. The police coroner, Thomas Bond, gives a psychological portrait of Jack, whom he considers to be a solitary man, prone to bouts of homicidal and erotic mania. This is the oldest profiling document in history, but like the other investigations, it comes to nothing. The police are desperate. Police officers even disguise themselves as women and mingle with prostitutes to lure the criminal, obviously without success. The press adds to this and doesn't hesitate to criticize the police, who are considered incapable of protecting the public. However, Scotland Yard does not spare any effort. 300 new people are questioned, including 76 butchers, both butchers and doctors. More than 80 suspects are arrested. It was necessary to act quickly because the population was becoming paranoid. In Whitechapel, a vigilance committee made nightly rounds and reported to the police anyone deemed suspicious. It is a time of paranoia and scapegoats. We cannot imagine an Englishman behind these horrible crimes, and so, logically, we blame the immigrants, and in particular, the 80,000 Jews who came from Central Europe to escape the pogroms and repression. Many of them narrowly escaped being lynched. Following public suspicion spread by the press, the police interrogate a certain John Pizer, a Jewish shoemaker in Whitechapel nicknamed Leather Apron. He was a Polish immigrant, but neither he nor the other suspects fit Jack's profile. Anti-Semitic graffiti begins to cover the walls, and police and newspapers receive thousands of letters denouncing an acquaintance, a neighbor, or offering services to help the investigation. Jack the Ripper stops killing after his fifth official victim, Mary Jane Kelly, on November 9, 1888. And we don't know why he stops like that. And for that matter, we don't know who he was. We can't count the number of books that claim to know the truth by putting forward the name of a culprit. Jack the Ripper was a member of the royal family, Prince Albert Victor, grandson of Queen Victoria, who was said to have frequented prostitutes in Whitechapel. Or the Queen's surgeon, Sir William Gull, who allegedly murdered these women to protect the reputation of the royal family. Or James May Brick, a Liverpool merchant who accused himself of the murders in his diary, found in 1991. Or Walter Sickert, a famous tortured painter of the Victorian era. Or John McCarty, a landowner who had harbored prostitutes, including the last victim, Mary Kelly. Or even a woman, huh? There's even a theory of a Jackie the Ripper. Which is still very porn-like, I admit. But anyway, to conclude, we don't know who it was. And the latest revelation, it's from March 2019, where, that's it, we have found the identity of the criminal Aaron Kosminski, a Jewish, Polish immigrant who had serious psychiatric problems. And by the way, science would have confirmed it. DNA analysis on a blood and semen-stained shawl would have been found near the fourth victim, Catherine Eddowes, and the descendants of this would have matched this DNA. The police had suspected this barber, had questioned him, but for lack of evidence had released him. But the flaw in this is that this DNA is rather old and fragile. The shawl is of dubious origin, and so many people have touched it that the traces may have been modified. And then on top of that, the scientific methodology that was used for the analysis of the shawl has been heavily criticized. Aaron Kosminski, on the other hand, died 30 years after the fact, in 1919, while he was committed to an asylum for schizophrenia. Another shaky lead then. Will we ever know for sure who Jack the Ripper was? Probably not, but the character continues to fascinate and find his place in popular culture, since he has inspired a colossal number of books, comics, video games, opera series, movies, and many others. The only thing we know for sure today is that he's dead, taking all his mystery with him. Thank you all for following this episode, co-written with Stéphane Genet, historian and history teacher in Tours. I also put a reference book on Jack the Ripper by serial killer specialist Stéphane Bourgoin in the description. Don't hesitate to subscribe, to share, to comment, and find me on my accounts on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. It's Nota Bene Movies. Until next time, for a new episode, maybe a little less bloody. Later.